Chapter 5. They went across the lake to the region of the Gerasenes. When Jesus got out of the boat, a man with an impure spirit came from the tombs to meet him. This man lived in the tombs, and no one could bind him anymore, not even with a chain. For he had often been chained hand and foot, but he tore the chains apart and broke the irons on his feet. No one was strong enough to subdue him. Night and day, among the tombs and in the hills, he would cry out and cut himself with stones. When he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and fell on his knees in front of him. He shouted at the top of his voice, "What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? In God's name, don't torture me." For Jesus had said to him, "Come out of this man, you impure spirit." Then Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" "My name is Legion," he replied, "for we are many." And he begged Jesus again and again not to send them out of the area. A large herd of pigs was feeding on the nearby hillside. The demons begged Jesus, "Send us among the pigs. Allow us to go into them." He gave them permission, and the impure spirits came out and went into the pigs. The herd, about 2,000 in number, rushed down the steep bank into the lake and were drowned. Those tending the pigs ran off and reported this in the town and the countryside. And the people went out to see what had happened. When they came to Jesus, they saw the man who had been possessed by the legion of demons sitting there, dressed, and in his right mind. And they were afraid. Those who had seen it told the people what had happened to the demon-possessed man, and told about the pigs as well. Then the people began to plead with Jesus to leave their region. As Jesus was getting into the boat, the man who had been demon-possessed begged to go with him. Jesus did not let him, but said, "Go home to your own people, and tell them how much the Lord has done for you, and how he has had mercy on you." So the man went away, and began to tell in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and all the people were amazed.
So Mark's Gospel. And this is a very unusual incident, isn't it? It could be quite frightening, really, that what has happened here. There's Jesus, he's crossed over from the west side of the Lake of Galilee to the east. It's an area that Jews wouldn't have frequented that often, but he's gone across the lake and he's met this demon-possessed man who's very frightening. Now, I don't know if you've ever met anybody who's exhibited signs of demon possession or mental illness, but they can be quite frightening. And this man was obviously frightening to the local population, and he's living, what the text says, amongst the tombs. Well, most Jewish people wouldn't go anywhere near tombs or a graveyard, as we would think of it, because the Jewish leadership, the scribes and the Pharisees, taught that that was an unclean place, and if you had to enter that, then you couldn't worship at the synagogue or the temple for a set amount of time, and you had to go to the scribes and the Pharisees and the leaders of the synagogues, etc., and go through a cleansing process. Now, if we compare the Gospels, I said we're looking particularly at Mark, but Matthew mentions there were 2 demon-possessed men in this area. But Mark and Luke tell us about 1. Do we need to worry about that? No, we don't need to worry about that. I think that's just the way that Mark concentrates on the one that is most active to the story. We presume that Jesus healed him, but that was a straightforward one. This one was not a straightforward healing as we would take it. So we see that Mark is, by mentioning this incident in this particular way, he's trying to get his readers to reveal that Jesus is just not the Messiah of the Jews, but he's the Messiah, the Son of God, to the whole world. And I think that's what we can see in this story. This is the angle that Mark, the Gospel writer, is bringing to us. Jesus has crossed the lake, and it's at that time when there's a storm on the lake, and the disciples have got all excited because they're thinking they're going to drown, and they have to wake Jesus up and say, "Oh, I can do something about this storm." And he calms the storm. The wildness of the evil part of this world has been attacking them, and Jesus brings calm to it. And so he enters into this part of Galilee and brings quiet and order to another disturbed area. This time when human nature is called in. So this is the part of Galilee that we're looking at. This part over here, where the circle's going around, or the reverse line. It's called the Decapolis area, and Jesus is just up here on that. And it's the country of the Gerasenes, or whatever you like to pronounce it. I'm not too sure, and I don't think many other people are quite sure how you pronounce it. But there's this man who's possessed by demons there. A very frightening existence. Of course, some people today would say, perhaps, that Jesus healing demons in this way is really talking about mental illness. Sometimes suggested that the Gospels reflect a primitive worldview, and that is an ancient way of describing mental illness. But that's not quite the whole truth about it. Because if we recognise the existence of the spiritual realm, we can accept surely the possibility of demonic influence as something distinct from mental illness. And I think that's very true. But the line between the two is difficult and needs to be recognised carefully and discerned carefully. I don't think we should, if we see somebody acting strangely, we cannot automatically presume they are possessed of evil spirits or mental illness. We need discernment, and we've got to be careful. We have to recognise that the church today has on occasions made some bad mistakes over this issue. But to me, there's no doubt that this man is filled with evil spirits, and Jesus has come to heal him of this, and it's distinct from mental illness. But we have to recognise that we can't go and jumping into suggestions that everybody who's existing peculiar and nasty behaviour is possessed by demonic spirits. And as a history, it's very difficult to discern that. I don't know if you've ever been. I spent time working in the West Indies on some of the small islands there. And when people were either possessed of demonic spirits or mental illness, they were chained up outside. And that was the way they dealt with them. And find that's very strange. And that still goes on today. There are some groups of people who just don't understand mental illness, and so the only way they deal with these people is to chain them up, because they can be violent There's no two ways about this. The Jewish authorities defined people with demonic spirits as people who had multiple personalities, were violent, powerful and frightened people, had superior strength from ordinary people, and that they usually injured themselves. In other words, they were tormented. And that is a description of mental illness or demonic possession. And so we have to be careful. We cannot discount one or the other. C.S. Lewis said this: "There are two equal and opposite errors into which our race can fall about the devils. One is to disbelieve in their existence. The other is to believe and feel an excess and unhealthy interest in them. They themselves are equally pleased by both errors and hail a materialistic or a magician with the same delight." So we've got to be careful. But whatever, Jesus, like all his mission, never avoided these tricky situations, did he? We remember a few weeks ago we looked at it when he went up to a leper, to the horror of the disciples and everybody around, touched him and healed him because they didn't fully understand. Yet the Son of God did understand all things and was able to discern and deal with them. It's quite interesting, this story, where the disciples, from our little video there, keeps well away. Jesus goes up and confronts this man directly. And this man addresses him by a true title. He says to him, "What do you want of me?" "Jesus, Son of the Most High God. In God's name, don't torture me." In other words, he recognises that Jesus was God's Son. Why would somebody recognise that who doesn't come from a Jewish background? It can only be because of the evil spirits within him. But that doesn't put Jesus off. He heals this man. And in a sense, Jesus finds out very quickly that this man wasn't just possessed with one evil spirit, he was possessed by several, because he called this evil spirit out of him. The man's character didn't change that quickly, and so Jesus asks some more questions. And he says to him, doesn't he, "What is your name?" And the man turns round and says, "My name is Legion." Now that obviously wasn't his name. Legion is a description of a vast amount of soldiers. The Roman army had legions, and they were 2,000 to 3,000 men in strength. So Jesus begins to understand that this man is possessed by more than one evil spirit, and so he calls them out again, and the man pleads, and the demons plead through the man that they don't want to be expelled from the country. Well, we know from our teaching and our understanding of evil spirits, some evil spirits are very territorial, and therefore you have to deal with them in that way. I explained a few weeks ago, I've dealt on a couple of occasions with people who have been possessed by evil spirits, and we need to be fully trained for this sort of thing. It's not wouldn't recommend anybody goes into dealing with this sort of thing. But we do know that in some things, evil spirits can be territorial. My first ministry job was in High Wycombe, and there's a lot of sense of that around. There was a lot of territorial evil spirits around the High Wycombe area. Why? Because the area as a whole is quite populated by witches and covens and old types of clans that worshipped evil people. There's a history of it in and around that particular place, and so you have to deal with it. But Jesus understood this, and he dealt with it, and he particularly prayed in a particular way, and this man was freed from these evil spirits, and the evil spirits rushed into these pigs, and these pigs rushed into the water. We see there, I just missed that bit, that the man went down on his knees, but he wasn't worshipping Jesus. He was just acknowledging who Jesus was. So these pigs rushed into the water. Now this was, we're told there were 2,000 pigs. That was an awful lot of pigs, isn't it? And if this happened in today's things, we can imagine Jesus getting into trouble with all sorts of things. He would have got in trouble with the Environment Agency for polluting the lake. He would have got in trouble with the RSPCA because of cruelty to animals. And I'm sure the National Union of Farmers and consumer groups would have been up in airs at the waste of food that was going on in this incident. But most alarming, isn't it? I mean, this was something, 2,000 pigs must have been worth an awful lot of money to somebody. Pigs, I don't know what they go, but if they go for £100 a time, that's nearly over £200,000, isn't it? Of somebody's money gone rushing into the lake. It's an expensive way of curing somebody with unclean spirits. But I think from Mark's possible viewpoint, he doesn't want us to concentrate on the pigs. That was just a way of dealing with it. Yes, the people of the town didn't like it and asked Jesus to leave. And Jesus left. But as he leaves, the two people that have been possessed by evil spirits are free and normal and free to return back at homes. And that's what we need to realise, that I think Mark wants us to concentrate on the man, the freed man, not on this group of pigs that are just died. The people of the district, not unlikely, is it, that they were concerned more for the pigs than the healing, the power of Jesus. But of course, Jesus is not only bringing healing to this man, he's freeing him up from the evil that stops him worshipping the living God. And that's what we must understand by this time. Mark wants to show his readers what it means for Jesus and the kingdom of God to break into this world. This is the whole point of Mark mentioning this incident. Not all incidents, healings and parables that Jesus did, we must remember, are recorded. We are told that there wasn't enough writing materials and paper and all that to record everything at the time of Jesus. So there were many things were going, and Mark has particularly taken out this incident of this man in this particular place. And he wants us to concentrate that Jesus wants to heal broken lives. This poor man was living in a graveyard, a place of contamination in Jewish terms. He was ritually unclean and couldn't have come back amongst the community. And yet Jesus particularly gives him a second chance at life. Jesus knows that the evil in this world prevents us from worshipping the living God and living in the kingdom of God. And he wants to assure us that we can be freed from the evil that inherits this world. The demon-possessed man's been liberated, and he shows gratitude for that liberation. It's interesting that his response to this release from demonic influences is that he asks to be part of Jesus' group. He wants to belong to them. And unlike other occasions, Jesus stops him and sends him back into the community to tell his story. The demon-possessed man takes his freedom, grabs his second chance of life, shows his gratitude, and sets off to tell his testimony in his hometown. Now, it's quite interesting that on other occasions during this part of ministry, when people were healed from leprosy and all sorts of other diseases, and even being cleaned of unclean spirits, Jesus tells them not to tell everybody, to keep quiet. Why? Because he doesn't want the Jews around him to start proclaiming him as a king. But this man who's a Gentile and lives in a Gentile area, that's okay for him. He wants him to spread the word of life to everybody. I know Jesus' main mission in life was firstly to the Jews. We see evidence here early on in Jesus' mission that his story, his saving power is for everybody. And that's great. So the Lord refuses his request and asks the man to return to his own town. The instructions of the Lord are different from the guidelines he delivered to many Israelites. And that's the reason, mainly because he knew this man wasn't going to come back into Jewish territory. He was going to keep into the area what we call the Decapolis, where Gentiles live, and he could spread his message there, and there was no danger of those people trying to claim him as solely as the Jewish Messiah. But we need to, take this story today in the message that Satan nowadays in our society disguises himself more as an angel of the light than possess people with evil spirits, I think. Satan can get into our lives when we don't fully commit ourselves to following Jesus. He is the person who tries to corrupt our lives and corrupt the lives around us, try to gradually distract us from being his disciple. And that's what we must understand by this particular story and Mark's emphasis in it. I believe Mark is also trying to warn his Gentile readers of the great dangers too of the demonic influences and activities in their world. Because don't forget, he was sending this letter, this gospel was going into the Greek-Roman world, where the worshipping idols and many unclear things were, and that's where the danger is of becoming possessed by evil spirits, isn't it? See, the Greeks believed in a spirit world, but not necessarily convinced that all evil spirits were evil. Mark needs to instruct the new followers of Jesus that we must keep away from evil things in our life. We must keep away from evil influences. And we do that these days by being careful what we watch, what we read, who we associate, where we go, perhaps. That's the way we keep away from it today and keep ourselves free from it. This is the way that Satan subtly drags us away from worshipping the living God in that difficult times of our lives these days. We all struggle, I think, sometimes, don't we, to follow Jesus by the pulls of the society around us, by the pulls of perhaps our unbelieving members of the family. But we've got to be keen to stand firm and live up to what it means to be a disciple of Jesus Christ in these days. Well, next time we're going to finish off this series in Mark next week by looking at the Transfiguration, that time when Jesus took 3 of his disciples up on the mountain and met with Moses and Elijah.